We're going to be in the Gospel of Mark, but let's go on ahead and go to Luke chapter 8 first. We're going to read the passage that we're not going to be in, and then we'll look at the passage we are going to be in. Luke chapter 8. Luke chapter 8, beginning at verse 40, and if someone would read through verse 48.
Verse 40 to 48?
Yes, ma'am.
When Jesus returned, the crowd gladly received him, for they were all waiting for him. Then a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue, came and fell down at Jesus' feet and begged him to come to his house. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. As he went, the people crowded him, and a woman having a hemorrhage for 12 years, who had spent all her living on physicians, but could not be healed by anyone, came behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her hemorrhage dried up. Jesus said, "Who touched me?" When everyone denied it, Peter and those who were with him said, "Master, the crowds are pressing against you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that the power has gone out from me." When the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling, and falling down before him, she declared to him before all the people why she had touched him and how she was healed immediately. Then he said to her, "Daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace."
All right, thank you. All right, now let's go to our main text, Mark 5. Mark 5. And if I get someone to read 21 through 34.
Now when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet, and begged him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live." So Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. Now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years, and had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment. For she said, "If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well." Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to him, "You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction."
All right, thank you. So, as this one opens up, where have we just come from? Well, we just came from in the Decapolis. Remember, this was where Jesus and his disciples had been crossing the Sea of Galilee, and that was when the storm came up, the wind and the waves, and tried to kill them. And the wording there makes it clear that that was an attack by the devil. The devil, the spiritual realm against God, was trying to kill the apostles and the Lord, and it didn't work. Well, when they got to the other side, what were they actually going on to the other side to do? Well, they were going on to the other side, do you remember, to free the men that were possessed by Legion, And so while he's on that side, the only person who wants to follow Jesus is the one that was healed of the legion. Everyone else says, leave and don't come back. So they see this great miracle, and they see this great demonstration of power. They reject him. And Jesus says to the man, he says, you go be my evangelist. You go tell of the good things that God's done for you. But when he comes back to the other side, now the crowds are waiting. They're expecting. And this is one of those great truths in Scripture. Now, I believe in marketing, okay? I believe in marketing. If people don't know where you are, it's hard for people to find where you are, okay? There are people that I've met since I've been here, and I wish I could say this was the only town. The only town it wasn't an issue was where we were in North Arkansas. Because, you could see almost every church in town from every other church, all 5 of them, inside city limits. But every other town, well, where's the Church of Christ? And I say to people, now because we've got McDonald's, it's easier. I say, do you know where McDonald's is? Oh, yeah. I said, have you ever gone from McDonald's to the lake and followed where the road curves? Yeah. You saw that big tan building on the right-hand side that takes up most of the block? Yeah, that's the church. Oh, I didn't know that was a church. Yeah. In Texas, we were on a major highway through town. Tell people, here's where we are. Eventually, I said, okay, do you know where the Dairy Queen is on North? Yeah. And I said, you see the playground when you go to Dairy Queen? Yeah. I said, the building next to the playground that's fenced in, that's the church. Oh, I just thought that was a playground there. I didn't know it was part of the church. Okay. What, do you think we have a playground right next to, a main highway with 18-wheelers coming through town at 70 miles an hour just for funsies? They didn't know where the church was, but they knew where Dairy Queen was. But the church building had been there 30 years longer than Dairy Queen. In Missouri, no one really ever knew where we were. What'd you say, Don? Because it was in Missouri, they were so miserable they couldn't find it? Well, that's true. They always walk around going, show me, show me, show me, right? Yeah. And where I'm going with this is, right, some people are like, no, we need an aggressive marketing campaign. You can get so good at marketing that you forget what the message is. Okay? Use Facebook properly. I don't mind every once in a while dropping $5 or $10 for Facebook to do targeted ads. Once in a while. Because the boost and the clicks that you get change your algorithm, and you can go on ahead and hit a couple $10 boost 2 or 3 times, and it'll boost you for the next 3 or 4 months in your region. But to devote $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 to it, no. Because I'm not hunting followers for Jesus. I want people to know where we are. I want people to be able to find part of what the message is, and if it appeals to them, for them to choose that they want to come and learn. And that's one of those things is that, and always remember this, brothers and sisters, you're not trying to make people believe in Jesus. When you're talking to people about Jesus, your main job is to introduce people to something about him for them to gauge whether or not they want to learn more. That's it. That's all you're doing. Some people are like, but I don't want to, turn someone away from Jesus forever. If you say to someone says, what do you think about X, Y, Z on marriage? And you answer them rich and you go, well, Jesus said to us that in the beginning, God made them a natural male and a natural female. And he said, that's what constitutes marriage. And if they go, I ain't coming to your church, you're a bunch of hate mongers. Okay. Well, you should have had a better answer than that. I should have had a better answer than what Jesus said? Wow. Well, I don't know what kind of church you go to, but Well, you could have tempered it. Did Jesus ever not give people straight answers to straight questions? You know? And so there's a thin line. There's a thin line. Right? All we're doing is when people show an interest, we want to talk to them more. If they don't want to talk about them, just like Jesus, go back to the other side. Go back to the other side of the street. You know? All right. Now, I want to touch on this because, Rich, I know you're familiar with liberation theology and all the other different variant theologies out there, right? Jairus, he's named and respected. The woman, she's anonymous and she's an outcast. Some people see that means that men were hateful back then. Okay. Keep your crazy American theology out of it for a minute. Synagogue ruler was wealthy. The woman, she had nothing left financially. Jairus had about 12 years of joy. She'd had 12 years of suffering. Now, depending upon who you read, right? But here's the point I want you to get. In the kingdom of Christ, covenant privilege is not based on whether anyone knows your name or you're well respected. Or if no one knows your name because they didn't know you were in the police blotter 2 weeks ago. Okay? It's okay to be wealthy. It's okay to be bankrupt financially in the church. I've always laughed, Rich, when the preacher gets up, God doesn't want, wealth and blah, blah, blah. And then he gets up, we need money for X, Y, Z. Really, bro? Okay. Is there a place for the wealthy in the body of Christ? Yes. Is there a place for the bankrupt? Yes. Apparently, last time I checked, there's a place for everybody. Now, generally speaking, when people who are bankrupt come into Christ, all things being equal, as long as, you're not living in a time of extreme chaos, generally things come up for you. That's just a byproduct of righteousness and righteous living overall. Was Jairus bad because he had 12 years of joy and the woman good because she had 12 years of suffering? No. And you say, why are you bringing this out? Because sometimes people draw on some of this stuff and try and make lines where really they shouldn't. Jairus shouldn't have felt bad because things in his life were good and the woman's life was, quote, bad. We have people today that what? Well, you should feel bad if you have a working vehicle and someone else has to walk to work. What? I worked hard. I paid for the truck. I paid for the car. I didn't spend it all on all kinds of stuff that I shouldn't have. I mean, brother be 38 years old, riding a Huffy bicycle, and he's missing 90% of his teeth because he did meth for the last 20 years. It ain't my fault he ain't got no truck. Well, you should have compassion on him. I do, brother. Here's a bottle of cold water for your bike ride. If I got room in the bed of my truck, if you want to sit in the bed of my truck and put your bike in it, I'll drive you. Right? But there is that place. What? You can stay. You can come up and help me teach.
I don't think you like that very much, brother.
Oh, never know. I've taught with baby on my arm many a time. So, yeah, brother. Mm.
You know, they console one another, and those seasons of life for one another. But friends like, why is God punishing us like this? You know, and
Yeah.
you know that was their instinctive reaction. They come to other understanding in talking about it, and that's our instinctive
Yeah.
as human, as people, as spouses, is to say, you know, well, that person, they're not doing good, they're not upright, they're not successful, they're not doing right by God.
Yeah. And
Getting punished for something they've done.
and that's right, brother. You know, and it's a hard thing for people to understand, especially over, I'm going to say, the last 80 years. We'll say since the end of World War II. Because the World War II generation, when they came out of the Great Depression in World War II, the number one thing they wanted was to never be unhappy again. That was their entire driving force. And people think life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness means no trouble, no heartache, no struggle. And that has kind of pervaded the culture, that somehow when there's life, pursuit of life, you have the freedom to have a life. No one owns you. You know, you say, well, you know, the bank owns me. No, technically they don't. Now, they can take everything you have, but they can't put you in prison for debt. We don't have debtors' prisons here, right?
Paul, is there one of his epistles about being content in whatever season of life he finds himself in?
Absolutely. He writes it to the Philippians. He writes it a couple different times.
That's truly the definition of spiritual joy, is being able to find that contentment in whatever circumstances we find ourselves.
It is. You know, and that's what we do or don't do with our freedom as Americans, we will answer for on the day of judgment. That's the scariest thing about being born in America. The amount of freedom of choice we have in so many areas and the amount of influence that we're able to exercise, God will hold us super accountable on so many different levels. But eventually, everyone is what? Gonna die. When you're 90, right? I long ago quit praying for my grandma to live. You know, she's either going to be 99 or she's going to be 100 this September. You know, she knows it's one or the other. Last time I talked to her, you know, and someone, you wouldn't pray for your grandma to live? Why? God and Father, let grandma go home. Let her rest. Why? She's been missing grandpa for the last 25 years. Let her go home and rest. Right? You're not right with God or wrong with God just because of basic things in life. Now let's look at what happened with this lady. Because this lady is an actually amazing lady. She's an amazing lady. Okay? So let's look at verse 25, right? And a certain woman who had an issue of blood 12 years. Now, different people have hypothesized. If you've ever known anyone with endometriosis, you know, the general characteristics of this probably indicate to me endometriosis. And for ladies, you know what that is. For a lot of the guys, you're going, endo what? You know, I mean, there's a couple of other things it could have been, but very plausibly, and because of how endometriosis actually spreads through the body, and all that, she suffered much, right? But she had the issue of blood 12 years. So let's talk about suffering much for just a moment. Some people, and I'm going to say this, and it's all right if you disagree, just don't get too mad about it. Some people will ask you to pray for them when the last thing they want is to ever get better. And they say, what? I've known a variety of people all across the country that because of chronic illness, they want relief from the pain or the suffering for a little bit, but they don't ever actually want it gone because the chronic illness has brought them a different level of attention and identity and everything else that if their condition was gone, most of their life disappears. And you say, and Ronnie, I've known enough people that way, that with significant chronic illness, the number of people that if tomorrow you could free them from all of their chronic illness would choose to go back to it. It is a huge mental, it's mental, it starts out, but then as the body chemistry changes and the body changes with the illness and then the mind. And what I'll say is for those who work in corrections, I don't care how many programs the government ever puts in place to teach, train, give guys skills, give them degrees, some guys will always go back to prison. Why? That is the core of their identity. They do not know how to function in any other way. It's a chronic disorder regardless. It is. Yeah. You know, the kid that gets popped at 17 because he stole a pack of cigarettes that the sheriff lets him spend the night, you know, in solitary, you know, and turns off the temperature controls, you know, and makes sure, you know, Big Bubba comes by to scare him a couple times. That kid might very well get scared straight. But if that kid goes in 3 or 4 times, where's that kid probably going to end? He ain't going to stay in the sheriff's jail for long. He's going to eventually end up in the DOC. Because why? It starts a process. And I'll give you just an example from medicine. Okay, and you can say, well, the techniques are better now. No. Who remembers when, you know, if someone had open heart surgery, you know, stay in bed and don't move for the next 2 weeks in the hospital. Now, like 2 hours after the surgery, all right, you need to be up and walking around. Knee replacements. How quick do they want you up and walking around? Yeah. And the reason why is what? They don't want what you just had gone through to become your new normal operating mode. Okay? And so for this woman, and here's where I'm going with this, 12 years chronic disease. Most people, you say, and I'll just say this from personal, and Michelle, feel free to disagree with me. I've known way too many veterans that will lead conversation with their conditions and their disability percentages because that's their new identity. I'm not talking about all the guys that all got back billed with 100% because they all got hit with Agent Orange and the government finally decided, you know, after like 75% of all Vietnam vets were dead. Don't ever lose sight of that. They didn't want to acknowledge all the guys that had suffered from Agent Orange until nearly all of them were dead. And then they said, everyone who's still alive, okay, we'll get you 100%. Those guys, they don't own it. They're just like, yeah, I've got 100%, I've got VA benefits. Because why? They lived a life without it. But I've known a lot of guys, they are their diagnoses. So her coming out of this place is a big deal. Under many physicians. I had to laugh. One commentator said, you know, the medicine was so barbaric back then. Who understands some of our stuff's pretty barbaric too. And who understands our medical system is extremely abusive. Well, you know, you have to get these 19 tests done, and the test will take 11 months to get them all scheduled. Then nobody wants to schedule during the month of Christmas and December, because why? Well, the insurance policies are going to renew, and I'm not going to be on that plan, and now you start all over again. Do you not understand you're spending your whole time suffering under many physicians? And oh wait, and she spent all, total financial ruin. How much money for insurance and co-pays, and then you still don't actually get treated, and the clock turns over and it starts again. You see, I need you to understand. You say, why you spend time on this? If we don't get very much further, I need you to understand what happens with this lady. It's not just the way life was then. The same stuff she suffered with still goes on now. I told you about Texas billionaire and his family that I knew. His brother and I were friends. And he and the billionaire and his wife were supporters of my campaign. And he says, yeah, my brother-in-law had a heart attack. And I said, well, I'll keep him in prayer. He says, oh, you don't need to. He said, they sent the helicopter from XYZ hospital. They flew him in. He said, he gets medical care none of the rest of us will ever know about. And he's right. He's right. The hospital sent their own private jet helicopter to pick him up on his own helipad. Good guy, though. Good guy. I don't begrudge him his wealth. I don't begrudge him his wealth because he gave some of it to me. You know? Well, you got to be honest about it, right, kid? And like I say, good people, God-fearing people, use their money for a lot of good works. But when he had a problem, he didn't play the insurance game. Okay. But how many? And then when that clock rolls over, all of that, now your deductible starts all over again. And that doctor, well, we want to have more recent results. Really, the last set's 33 days old. Well, you know, but we're not sure of their system. Okay. When the mafia does this, it's called racketeering. But when you do it, it's called health care. Gotcha. Gotcha. Same stuff. And what? She grew worse. You went in with XYZ complaint one time. 3 years later, now it's a major operation. Okay? Yeah. Well, yeah, and because we're not talking about Jairus' daughter, yeah, it's the structure of ABA. It starts with Jairus on the front end, it ends with Jairus on the back end, and this woman's in the middle. No, Jairus hadn't suffered for 12 years. Yeah, his daughter had taken suddenly ill and was on the edge of death, is every indication. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because for 12 years, she's been looking forward to a life of promise. Yeah. Yeah. And this woman for 12 years has had a life of nothing, has had a life of nothing. And I want you to see, I mean, this lady's gutsy. She's gutsy. she's already religiously out of communion with everyone and everything. Okay? Not allowed to touch anybody, not allowed to be touched. You say, well, how'd she have food? Someone probably brought it and dropped it off on her doorstep. She doesn't have to get kicked out of town like a leper, but she ain't too far from it. Every touch contaminates everyone else. And the real truth is, had people realized she was in the midst of them, they'd have probably killed her. Probably killed her. And so you've got that. And we're going to run out of time. For my adults, is it all right if we circle back and finish this lady next week? Because she's a big deal. And here's how big a deal she is. I'll give you a jump forward. She's the only woman that Jesus ever directly used the word daughter with. No one else ever. Daughter. He'll say of another woman, should not this daughter of Abraham? But as far as him directly calling someone a daughter, this is the only one he ever calls daughter. So some other thoughts on this. Because the background on it, it's a big deal. Luke and why we read Luke, and I would encourage you to go back and read Luke again. Luke uses a little bit different language. In Luke 8:43, Mark says that she suffered much under many physicians and became worse. Luke just observes the objective outcome. She could not be healed by anyone. She could not be healed. And and this is, Luke emphasizes the biological impossibility of a recovery to underscore the scope, the supernatural scope of what will happen. Thoughts, comments, questions? We've had some good discussion so far tonight. What you got, kid? Excellent. So what Kendall said, 12 years of joy, 12 years of suffering, they both come together at the same point of the answer in Jesus Christ. I'm saying that mainly so that people online can kind of have an idea of what you said, kid. And 12 biblically what? Normally 12 signals the number of perfect religion. 12 tribes, 12 apostles, 12 tribes of 12,000 in the book of Revelation, right? And I'm not saying that's just a numerology thing, but 12 years of suffering and 12 years for the girl, each one's been a complete cycle. It's a cycle of perfection. It's a cycle of completion. Because at 13, right, what happens at 13 in Jewish Middle Eastern culture for male and female? Right, that's your first step of manhood or womanhood. At 13, you were fair game to get married in the ancient Near East. For those who are like, oh, that's barbaric. Well, okay, there were a lot of young ladies at 14 and 15 that were getting married back in the 1940s and 50s. And they ran families and homes, and they did just fine, okay? But because we live in Florida, now outside of Florida and Texas, most people, and California, most people don't know, what do you have? Quinceañera, right? She turns 15. It's like almost for some families, it's a bigger deal than her wedding. But what is the quinceañera? She's 15. Now she's eligible to go that stage. Jairus' daughter's right there on the edge of it. She's had a complete cycle of her childhood, and now she's ready to enter into her maidenhood. And so it's the 12, it's completion. It's completion. So good point, kid. It's almost like you've been studying your Bible and paying attention. Evan says our song of invitation is 904, correct, Evan? All right. 904, have you been to Jesus? Well, we are glad that you're here to. Come on up, son. Dude, I ain't going to take that long. All right? I'll let you sit on the front row because it's going to be quick. All right. I didn't fill my phone, Buzz, so I don't know if I've got fresh. Nope. All right. My wife left her phone on the charger. Didn't realize it till she'd got down there. So we had to communicate via Google Chat on her mom's phone. So that was, it's always interesting. I know that they took at least one toe and part of the metatarsals behind it on his pinky. So I know it was at least that much. So appreciate everyone's prayers on that. He did come out of surgery and he was doing okay as far as coming out of surgery. Beyond that, I don't know. What else do we have that we need to be mindful of? Obviously, the kids at camp and all that. Michelle.
My aunt is not placed on hospice today. It's my dad's sister in Rhode Island.
Okay. All right.
And then my good friend Ashley Sloan and her daughter are in Zambia, Africa for 2 weeks. They just got their stay. We're on a
Okay. Okay. All right. All right. And then Colleen's brother, Gregory, he's made certain decisions concerning palliative care and not continuing with certain treatments. So prayers for him and for all of his related family members. Very hard thing. So keep those folks in prayer and him. What else do we have that we need to be mindful of? Well, you never know. They said that about my great uncle in 1987, that he'd be gone within the month. So my granddad missed Thanksgiving that year. 11 years later. So you never know. Yeah. All right. And when's your court date? Okay. Yep. All right. Okay. So just continue to keep Michelle and Allie in prayer. All right. Brother Darren.
This young man I work with, his name's Daniel Doyle. It's don't got a whole lot of information on it, but from what I can gather, he's got like a tumor or something in the back of his head that he might have to get removed.
Okay. All right. Daniel Doyle. All right. All right. Well, we'll Lindsay, yes. Okay. Okay. So travel mercies and Chicago mercies. Okay. Amen. Amen. Don't blame you. I lived there for a very brief time. I was fine to get gone from it. Yeah. It's nice to see in quick passing. So, all right. Like the song says, have you been to Jesus? If you have something that you need to bring that we haven't already looked at, or if you need to come back to the Lord, or you need to be obedient to the gospel,